welcome to another session of Aucademy. I haven't been here for a while, so it's great to be back. My name is Annette, and let's see what my physical. I struggle on this one, but I will. I am a 50-year-old woman, or non-binary person, with long blonde hair and blue eyes, an oval face, and I've got a gray shirt on. And I'm sitting in a kind of really boring white room with the bookshelf in the background. Ben, my co-host, would you give a physical description for yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Ben. I'm a young white man with shortest blonde hair. I'm wearing a grey and yellow t-shirt with headphones on, and I've got a bookcase behind me.
Yes, your background is so much more interesting than mine. And yeah, I already misgendered myself and we just started. So no, and we are joined today by Emily Banks. Would you mind giving us a physical description?
Of course, yeah. So I've got long, straight brunette hair. I'm a white female with browny eyes, I believe, with a black top, sitting in a very sort of neutral white room with a wardrobe behind me and a door.
Fabulous. Wow, yours is actually more neutral than mine. Amazing.
Yeah. Oh, dear.
So today we're discussing autistic employment or neurodivergent employment. But first, Emily, we ask kind of the questions we always ask at the beginning. Who are you and what is or are your dedicated interests?
Of course, yeah. So my name's Emily. I'm the founder of a company called Enna, and we are a social enterprise that supports neurodivergent people to find meaningful employment with inclusive employers. We operate nationally. We do various things like training, coaching, and also the recruitment and the employment support type of thing as well. And my dedicated interests, so I'm very sporty. I like going to the gym. I think it keeps me sort of nice and focused and productive. Other things as well. I don't know. I guess like seeing my friends and family. I'm quite like a sociable person. I think I get quite a lot of energy from being around people and people that are close to me. So that's what really interests me in general.
Oh, cool. Thank you so much. Yeah.
So I'll ask, when did you discover you're an ADHD?
So it was about a year or two ago now. And I don't know, there isn't much sort of education on, I think, women and ADHD and things like that. So I know, even when I started the business, I didn't really associate myself with being neurodiverse and having ADHD. But one of my friends was like, do you know, you've got a lot of sort of ADHD traits? And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. So I started doing the natural thing, a bit of Googling and sort of understanding a little bit more. And yeah, I couldn't quite believe it, given the business I'd started, that I definitely did have a lot of those traits, and I definitely did associate myself with it. So I'm just going through sort of a formal diagnosis at the moment.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, I have attention differences as well as being dyslexic and dyspraxic. So yeah, I'm all the things as well as being autistic. So yeah, and this isn't one of the formal questions, and if you don't want to answer it, it's fine. But I was just interested why you started the company or how that came about.
Yeah, of course. So my family were, I guess, the biggest inspiration. So my dad's autistic, has a diagnosis of Asperger's. My brother has a diagnosis of Asperger's. My middle brother's dyslexic. So I guess I grew up in a family that I thought was very different compared to my sort of friends at school, who would often go to things like, I don't know, centre parks, theme parks, all very busy places. And every summer we would go to the Lake District and we'd walk through the fields in the rain. And I'm like, oh, why can't I go to theme parks and all the busy sort of places? And I later realised it was because my brother and my dad were autistic, and those sort of environments were sort of highly overwhelming. So when I was at university, I did a bit more research into it, and realised there was a lot of people like them who were sort of exceptionally talented, but because they weren't, I guess, neurotypically sort of conventionally conversational and really extroverted and really confident, they really struggled to sort of convey these sort of things within the interview settings and with employers. So I wanted to help other people like them and help educate employers on the benefits of wonderful autistic people like my family members, and I guess provide that middle ground between employers and the neurodivergent community looking for work effectively.
That's fabulous. Okay, so So one of our first questions is, what can employers do to make spaces more neurodivergent and autistic friendly? Which is a huge question.
It is. There are so many things employers can do, and I definitely think they've got a very, very long way to go to actually making workplaces neurodiversity friendly. But I think first things first, even recognising neurodiversity within your organisation. I think some employers are a little bit blinded by the fact that, oh, no, we don't have anyone autistic within our organisation. We don't have anyone neurodivergent. So even recognising that your workforces are diverse and you do have a lot of different people, whether it's from different sort of intersectionalities of LGBT or neurodivergent or from an ethnic minority, just recognise these people and understanding that they are there and learning from them and sort of understanding that from the first place. In terms of like practical things they can do, definitely neurodiversity training, I think, and awareness training is, I guess, I would think was the go-to, hopefully, for a lot of organisations. Getting people that are neurodivergent to come in and actually educate people on what it's like to be neurodivergent. We offer training as well, and all of our facilitators are neurodivergent because we believe it's the best people to learn from are themselves, and we don't want to give people these like scientific models or methods or theories that I think the best people to learn from are neurodivergent people themselves. So that's what I'd say. Number one recommendation. Number two, so a bit more of a corporate-y thing, but something called an employee resource group. And that's effectively a special group within an organisation that can sort of discuss neurodiversity within an organisation and sort of develop a strategy and what they're going to do to actually encourage, I guess, the neurodiversity movement as well within that organisation. And I guess just encourage an open conversation, allyship as well. I think that's super, super important, that you can learn from the people within your organisation and actually understand what their needs are and understand how you can sort of develop and sort of start the neurodiversity movement from your organisation perspective as well.
Yeah, definitely listening to your employees and realizing that what they're saying, usually there's a major reason why they're saying it.
Absolutely.
I should ask the next one.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to an autistic or neurodivergent person who is trying to apply for a job?
So I would say for someone looking for a job, I would definitely recommend looking for sort of supportive, disability confident or neurodiversity friendly employers. I know the world can be a really, really scary place, especially for people that are neurodivergent looking for work. So I think I would definitely recommend actually finding someone that's neurodivergent, well neurodiversity friendly employers, and people that I know are going to sort of actively listen to you and support you in the workplace and things like that. In terms of trying to apply for jobs, so that was my number one thing. But things like developing your CV if you can, so finding someone to mentor you and support you to actually just upgrade your CV, develop your CV so you're sort of ready to actually apply for these positions. And I guess understanding your strengths as well is really important. So obviously neurodiversity and being autistic has a lot of really great strengths, and sort of learning what they are and how you can convey them to employers is really, really important as well. So I guess they would be my top tips for the first step.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, and I'm just looking. It's pretty crazy how many autistic people in general are unemployed in the UK. Yeah, was it 60% or something?
60%.
Yeah. Which is we need to change that.
And that stat really hasn't changed over a decade or two. Like, because the disability employment rate as a whole has decreased quite substantially. I think it's only 9% now, and it's gone down from maybe 18%, so it's almost halved over the past sort of decade. But the sort of autism employment rate hasn't really changed, which shows that there needs to be some sort of big change amongst employers and the people that run those organisations to actually become aware of the challenges people are facing, the barriers they're unnecessarily creating as well, and how they can sort of make their processes more inclusive of neurodivergent people as well.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think some of the major barriers are? I know I'm going off script because I'm just like that.
I would say job descriptions provides a huge sort of initial barrier. So we do a lot of work with employers on job descriptions. So things like not even using like a basic structure there, or including requirements that aren't completely necessary for that particular job. So I think neurotypical recruiters especially, they love to whack communication skills into any role and every role. And for a lot of autistic people, this may not be their greatest strengths. It could be for some people, but actually including requirements for the role that aren't essential can mean a lot of people don't even bother applying to those roles that they would be fantastic for. So it's even put an initial barrier to that job anyway. What else do employers do wrong? Where do I start? So job descriptions, definitely. Interviews, we've done a lot of work on interviews and those sort of interview processes, but essentially recruitment processes are built and made for neurotypical people, and we do base them on communication skills, your working memory, how confident someone is, how approachable someone is, social niceties, and all these sort of traits. Obviously for autistic people and dyslexic people, ADHD, they may have challenges with the traits that we sort of focus on in recruitment processes, which means we're definitely not sort of building them for the diversity of thought or different behaviours or different ways of thinking. So yeah, it's really, really difficult, and it's not built for the neurodivergent mind, especially.
Definitely not. I mean, interviews, and I think autistic people or neurodivergent people a lot of times are so honest as well. And if they see something that's on the job description that they well, I can't do that, or I'm not good, they won't kind of lie about it. Where a neurotypical person would just say, well, I can.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and there's just something about sort of masculine and feminine words in a job description as well, and how if it's certain words, then females maybe wouldn't apply for the role, and if there's certain requirements, then females would want to sort of make sure they can tick 90% of the boxes, whereas some males would do like 30 to 40%. So there's quite a lot of gender type challenges there as well when it comes to job descriptions.
Definitely. Yeah, and interviews, the whole idea that you have to have eye contact is so difficult for an autistic person. Like you said, niceties, things like that. I mean, I just finished my actually it's almost been a year now, God. My PhD Viva is, but basically it's an interview, and just kind of making, I had some adjustments for that, but making people aware of that, having breaks, being able to not have like 5 questions in one question, because that's just way too much to process. I'm stuck on the first word of the first question, and they've gone on to like other things, knowing that I'm going to be straightforward and that I'm not necessarily going to have all the niceties there, although I tend to be a people pleaser, so I tend to overdo that. But and everybody has different strengths. For me, absolutely. I'm quite dyslexic, so I'm actually better verbally. So one of the things for me is actually the application, getting that done, because I find that so stressful. So having somebody to help me do that sometimes, because but once again, a lot of autistic people are rejection sensitive, so sometimes you have to apply 50 times before you get one interview, and a lot of times it can be incredibly difficult to be like, well, nobody wants to hire me,
It's frustrating because a lot of the things employees can do, and especially sort of recruiters and managers, are very sort of simple things. So for example, even yourself during your PhD, just explaining at the start that this is how I may act and this is how you could respond to it. It's just simple transactional conversation. And I think a lot of employers think neurodiversity is this sort of highly complex thing that they have no idea about how to accommodate someone that thinks a little bit differently or may respond to things a little bit differently. So it's really frustrating how a lot of these things that we could be a lot more accommodating if we just listen to people, understood their behaviours and their strengths, and put simple sort of measures in place to actually support them.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so I'll get back to the script. What accommodations rights do you have in a job interview, accessibility wise?
So we all hate the word reasonable adjustments. It's highly sort of confusing. It's not really clear what reasonable is. It's not really clear what an adjustment is. But it's all down to reasonable adjustments, unfortunately. So in terms of accommodations, there are so many different examples of reasonable adjustments. And just to make things a little bit more clearer. The most common ones we see are sort of extra time or extra information, or the questions before in a job interview. And I think even basic things like giving people a really clear idea about what to expect and what to expect from the day. So this is who you're going to be meeting, this is location, this is maybe across where the entrance to the reception area is, or the office environment, wherever that may be. This is what you're going to be marked on. This is the sort of format of the day. I think can make it a lot more easier for a lot of neurodivergent people, just knowing what to expect really, and knowing what you're going to be sort of graded and assessed on really. So that's one example. Giving the questions before. So we've actually worked with an employer who's actually started giving everyone the questions before, because they've realised that although it's really beneficial for neurodivergent people, it's beneficial for everyone. And they found they've had really good results with all their candidates, just because I think typically if someone has to lie about some experience on the spot, it's very, very hard for everyone. So they found that they're just getting better results from all candidates basically. So they've started doing that completely. What other accommodations do we see? I think they're the most common ones, but I think if we're talking about more physical accommodations in interviews, so things like taking extra breaks if you have ADHD, for example, or what other things do we say? If you're dyslexic, so saying things verbally instead of relying on written communication, just really simple things really that would help sort of level the playing field between someone neurotypical and someone that's neurodivergent as well. In terms of rights, so the lovely Equality Act of 2010 is on your side. So legally, employers have to implement any sort of reasonable adjustments, and obviously they can't discriminate against you, or anything like stigma and things like that obviously can't exist. So if you do have bad experiences during the interview process and you think that's gone horribly wrong, you can then raise that with a HR department or a recruiter and say, well, the Equality Act states this, and I've experienced X, Y, and Z. Could I have an extra interview, or can I have an explanation for this, for example, as well?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and I think, because that was one of the other reasonable adjustments I had. I asked for the questions ahead of time for the Viva, which they were very dubious about doing. And I know that Chloe and her, and Chloe and her Viva, she asked, and they didn't give them to her. But I got a basis of kind of what was going to be the main kind of the gist of that, and that actually was incredibly helpful. And that's really good to hear that employers are finding that giving the questions ahead of time is good for everyone, because ultimately all kind of adjustments are good for everyone. And that's what we found time and time again. When people have to give presentations, if they're so anxious about the presentation that they don't show up for the presentation, that doesn't help anyone. Allowing people to pre-record presentations ahead of time as a student, just thinking of other things that it can be really incredibly helpful. And I think, what you were saying about, letting people know what is happening specifically, like giving people a schedule, maybe giving people a picture of what you look like, and, like you said, have an X mark the spot where you're supposed to enter. That alleviates a lot of anxiety that neurodivergent people would have about that interview, that might actually stop them from coming from the interview at all. Because if there's too many unknowns for someone, for autistic people, it just feels a lot of times too much to even be able to go, because it just feels like I think our lives are a lot of times so chaotic because of our experience with the sensory world, and how extreme that can be sometimes. Any kind of specificity you can give us will make it better.
The word reasonable is a funny one, because like you said, that if we truly valued sort of the human diversity of thought and the different brain functioning and the different way of working, then we would play to everyone's strengths, and we would truly learn to understand each candidate that come through our doors, whether they're sort of neurodivergent or neurotypical. Obviously, everyone thinks differently. Everyone has sort of unique strengths and challenges. So there wouldn't be any need for sort of, I guess, the term reasonable adjustments in the sort of Quality Act aspect of things, just because we would understand what everyone needs and how we can sort of play to their strengths and how we can work with them better. So if we had a perfect world, our job sort of wouldn't exist really, because everyone would be sort of valuing people individually.
So
I think what Callum says is quite important. Or you just said, kind of says, I think reasonable adjustments is helpful if viewed through the human lens of neurodiversity being a fact of life and raising everyone to be their most authentic self.
Absolutely.
That is
Yeah.
important.
Yeah, it's a brilliant way to put it as well.
Yeah. So I know, once again going off script, but so what are the services that you do provide? Do you work with neurodivergent people as well as working with employers, or?
Yeah, of course. So we're effectively a specialised recruitment agency, sort of with a twist. So what we do is we connect neurodivergent people to jobs with neurodiversity friendly employers. So I guess on the one side, people can register with us. Basically, just involves inputting their details, like I know their phone number, their email, and their CV. We have a pool of jobs which we partner with employers and actually make sure, or sort of understand that they are neurodiversity friendly for the right reasons. Would then input any sort of training in there to actually help them sort of develop that. And then we would advertise their job opportunities on our website. And if someone has registered that matches that, we could then put their CV forward and help them apply or amend their CV or help them through the interview process, implementing adjustments. It's just making sure they have the correct support in place, and any sort of recruiters or managers or whoever they are understand that individual and how they can get the best out of that individual, I would say.
Wow, that's brilliant. Yeah. No, really, I wish I would have had that when I was young. Yeah, although maybe even now, I'll be looking for a job, I'll be coming to you. Just to have that support, and also just kind of to have a little bit of a buffer between you and the neurodivergent world, and having somebody say, no, this company is, neurodiversity friendly, and they will, we've trained, and if we feel like they aren't enough, we will train them, which is really great.
Yeah, I think from an employer's perspective, obviously it can be seen as quite a confusing thing as well. Like there are so many different things on the Equality Act and what you're meant to do and what you're not meant to do. And obviously for neurodivergent people that may want to talk about being neurodivergent or autistic or actually disclosing, that can be really difficult as well, as there are obviously the whole sort of challenges around disclosure and whether you should or you shouldn't. So I guess we like to be the sort of middleman, that we know we're supporting candidates, we know we're sort of providing them with job opportunities with employers and managers that can sort of understand them for them, and they can put the correct support in place. So we're sort of, I guess, the middle ground, the helpful middle ground, I'd like to say.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, because if you can't say, because a lot of people, I have spoken to people who said, I don't want to disclose that I'm autistic because I don't think I'm going to even get an interview. But then if you do get the job, and then it's even more difficult to be able to say, okay, I am autistic, and I'm going to need these reasonable adjustments. And if that company is really not up for that, and in no way neurodivergent friendly, that's going to be a really difficult time. Obviously, sometimes that has to happen, but.
Yeah, so when people register with us, we don't require a sort of formal diagnosis either, to realise that a lot of people do identify as being autistic or neurodivergent, and there is this huge pool of people that may be a bit older and may not have that official diagnosis, or they may be even going through that 1 to 2 year wait, for example. So if you do identify as being neurodivergent, you're welcome to obviously register with us, and we'll try our best to sort of help you and connect you to jobs and things as well.
Great.
Brooke Lynn Nielsen says, having to disclose your entire medical history in order to get accommodations is a huge privacy issue. People should be able to say what specific accommodations they need without disclosing things.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Definitely. And it's difficult to have to be able to do that. So Ben, what's the next question here?
What advice do you have for autistic and neurodivergent people who have maybe gaps in their employments, perhaps because you said earlier about the unemployment rate being quite high. So obviously there's going to be periods of time in their life where they may be burnt out or having to withdraw from work. So the gaps in the employment history, what advice do you have?
I know it's sort of a very difficult one, but I would say try and be honest if you can, and sort of relate that as best to the job you're applying for. So if you've had, I know, a year out or 2 years out, and you've done brilliant things like personal projects or certain interests, or you have those special interests that can relate to the job. Think about maybe the transferable skills you've gained that maybe can apply to the role you're applying to. So it's not like you've not like you effectively had a long break from work. It's sort of you have been doing things that are beneficial and can contribute towards your career. So whether that's, we hear a lot of people doing sort of online courses, or maybe volunteering, or personal things like traveling, for example. All of these things can be really, really good to employers. And if you have needed to have that break, then sort of working out for a mentor or someone that can support you, or a parent or friend or family member, how you can best sort of talk about that if it does come up in interview as well. So if these questions do occur, you don't feel completely sort of lost, and you are sort of explaining about things you have done and how that can contribute to obviously your brilliant skills and your strengths as well in the workplace.
Yeah, and I would assume that maybe dedicated interests and kind of, because a lot of autistic people are amazing at research. So somehow conveying that, that we are just natural researchers. We tend to just be incredibly curious about the world. And that's an amazing skill to have, especially if you just do it on your own for fun.
A lot of these sort of hobbies and interests, they all do have really great skills attached to them. So I know when my brother was about 18 or something, for Christmas he received like this model car engine, and the idea was that over a few weeks or like a month that you would put all the different parts together. But he did it within like an hour or two on Christmas Day. And although that's technically a present, it's technically a hobby, he did want to become a mechanic, and it was his like special interest. So telling an employer that and being able to sort of, I guess, relate that to a physical car when he was actually sort of doing his college work and applying for roles, that's a really great skill to have. And that was technically obviously a present or a gift on Christmas Day, but it's such an exceptional skill. So just problem solving, logical thinking, and things like that as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I always say that neurodivergent people are amazing problem solvers, because we have to problem solve every day, all the time. We're constantly having to find ways to get around things, ways of doing things and understanding things that come much more easier to other people. So I think most neurodivergent people are just natural problem solvers. And we usually think very outside of the box because of that as well, because we don't fit in the box. So
Aucademy says that can obviously not be possible or the case for disabled and neurodivergent people who are trying to get through burnout.
Yeah. So is this in relation to things that you might be doing outside of? I don't know who I'm talking to. Say that again.
Is that in regards to like your break from work, if you need a sort of employment break?
I have a feeling. So some people wouldn't be able to travel because they would be in burnout and kind of basically stuck in their room. So I mean, I guess that's why I was talking about their dedicated interest. If that was, who knows, it could be coding or something that they do, from their bedroom or.
It can definitely come in a wide variety of things. So even if that's, I don't know, reading or something you do for half an hour a day to like chill out, or things like research, or maybe you have sort of small IT projects or coding or whatever people like to do to have that break. It doesn't have to be something you've done for, 6 months or a long period of time. It could be something you do on a sort of like a really small hobby basis. And I realised that, that definitely may not be the case for many neurodivergent people experiencing burnout. But if there's anything you've done within that period of your work break that you can mention, obviously that's still really great to mention no matter what it is as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think the example of the car is, being able to build that car, and the problem solving with that is, possibly doable. Okay, so the next question, do you have advice for how to start looking for employment if you haven't been able to work for a long time? So just, I guess,
definitely. So I think firstly just identifying your sort of strengths and getting your CV together. So one thing I definitely recommend is if you can get a mentor or someone to support you to do this, like a parent, or maybe it's even like a family friend or your own friend, because when you're actually looking for work, it can be quite a lonely place and it can be very overwhelming. So having someone there that you can, talk to on a weekly basis, whether it's over a coffee or over like a Zoom call or a phone call, whatever that may be, just to talk about things you can do and how you can support them and how they can support you and things like that. So identifying your sort of strengths as well and making sure these are conveyed through your CV. CVs are a really awful document and they can be quite confusing in terms of the layout and the format. But just getting people's feedback on your CV, and maybe someone that, I don't know, does work in an organisation, whether it's a family friend or someone that has an idea about what a good CV looks like, can be really helpful as well. And then I think just taking your time as well. I think it definitely can be a really lonely place and can be very overwhelming and may create quite a lot of anxiety for some people. So it doesn't have to be done overnight. You don't have to send 50 applications a week. If you're even sending 1 a week or 2 a week or whatever that works for you is really, really important. Take your time and just make sure you're sort of realising your strengths and applying for jobs that you want to as well. Like, I know when you get rejections, it can feel awful, like you're not qualified or you're not important to that employer. But yeah, definitely taking your time and getting support through that process, I think, is definitely really important.
Yeah, and that could even be another neurodivergent person that is also struggling to find work. You could support each other. A lot of times it's very easy to see strengths in other people and not be able to see those strengths in yourself or know what your strengths are. So even working with someone else that might, not be looking for work at the same time. And I don't know, we talked about, a lot of times Chloe has a Zoom that's open and we all kind of join it. And just having other people there that are working, you might not even say anything to each other, but is quite helpful as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It can be so lonely, especially when you're sitting on a laptop looking through Indeed or LinkedIn for a whole day and you're sending these applications off, you're not hearing anything back. It can be quite daunting and over sort of the world of sort of searching for work. So if there's, I know Chloe's just popped a link in there, but any sort of support or peer groups or social groups or whatever that may be, it's really can be really helpful to just have someone to talk to about your experiences and share your sort of experiences as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the things that I always found hard when I was young was trying to translate the things that I do into CV talk or CV language, and realizing, like, I used to put on my CV that I'd done Royal Academy of Dance exams up to intermediate grade, so grade 8 and then up to intermediate, because that showed that basically I had, I was determined and I continued to, do levels and I showed. What else did it show? I should have showed. You see, once again, I don't know what the CV talk is. But things like that, even something like that, once again, a dedicated interest can show, that you're dedicated, that you work hard, that you are passionate. All those things.
Yeah, and with a lot of sort of neurodivergent people, if you've got a special interest that does relate to the career you want to go in, whether that's sort of anything to do with computers or animals or childcare, sort of thinking and working with someone about how you can sort of convey that into put on your CV basically and sort of talk about that. Just getting someone else's feedback on that and giving it a go can help you land that hopefully initial internship or that initial job interview, whatever that may be as well.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that's pretty amazing about neurodivergent people is that a lot of times our dedicated interests, which seem ridiculous to other people, possibly neurotypical people, end up becoming a career. I've always loved art, and that is something that I've done my whole life. It's been a dedicated interest for me, and that did become my career. But for a long time, it didn't make very much money. So but that is something that has stuck with me and basically given me a job in the long run. In all sorts of unusual ways that I never thought would be possible. And I think that's really important as parents of neurodivergent kids to realize that you need to encourage people's dedicated interests because you never know where they may lead. And we learn so many things through one dedicated interest. So, all sorts of different things, like you said, problem solving. You get all this different knowledge. You have to learn other things to kind of continue with your dedicated interest. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, and I think when you're sort of at school or college or university, I think we have a tendency, well, people that work there, to especially sort of pigeonhole people into your standard careers, I would say. So like finance or internship programs or working at a bank or working in shops or things like that. When in reality, when you do get a bit older, you realize there are so many jobs out there. It's quite overwhelming to think, well, that your special interest or your dedicated interest could transfer into a role, because it most likely will. There's so many different jobs in so many different industries, and although I think we don't necessarily get educated about them when you are a bit younger at school and college, like we typically sort of talk about a lot of sort of neurotypical routes into careers and things like that, that you'll do an internship and then you'll go and do this, and there are so many different things you can do. So just if you are one of those people that think, well, I have an interest in this, but I don't think it's going to get me a job, just have a look out there about what's available, because there are so many different jobs and we often don't know about them until you're actually doing your job search as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, right now with the culture that we're in, schools don't encourage very much creativity within schools. And I think that's so sad, because there's so many jobs and so much knowledge that you can learn from creativity.
Definitely.
And, young people aren't being encouraged to go into that for university, or even A-levels. So, and I've known all sorts of people that have done, and this is just me, it's my passion, but degrees in fine art, and then gone on to do all sorts of unusual things. Like one of my friends became the social media and kind of videographer for a university. So they basically went around and interviewed people that didn't really know much about video, but they'd done a degree in fine art. Interviewed people and kind of worked with and made videos for YouTube for a university. And I never would have thought that would have been their job. They were for their final degree, they were making letters out of foam and floating them in water and taking pictures of them. So you never know what you're dedicated into. Explore your dedicated interest. Just get into it and don't worry what other people think. Because ultimately that can lead to employment that can be really fulfilling and you can really enjoy. And I think sometimes what people do is they tend to choose things because of those specific paths. Like you said, they say, oh, I have to do this job or I have to do that. And those are the only jobs that are going to make me money or be sustainable. But actually there's all sorts of jobs out there and you never know what they're going to be. And if you love what you're doing, it's more likely that you're going to enjoy the jobs that you do have. And I mean, that's the other thing to think about. You're not going to have the same job your whole life. Ultimately, and people think that, I think that's really daunting when you're young and you think, oh my God, I'm going to have to do this for the rest of my life. And then you realize very quickly that actually I've had so many different jobs. I was a picture framer. I was, I sold magic mops in a store once. That was a very long time ago. I worked in a bagel shop. But yeah, as an artist, I've done all sorts of different things. And I've worked in a gallery. I've done education. I've worked with people with dementia. I've worked with young people, and now I'm actually doing a postdoc, which I never thought I would do, looking at the mental health of young people. And if you told me when I started my PhD in drama, working with autistic people, that would be the thing that I would go into, and kind of working with psychologists, I never would have thought that in a million years. So I think really, really, don't let anyone tell you that your dedicated interest isn't important.
Oh yeah, I think especially in terms of school. So everyone has to do PE, everyone just has to do sports day, and our special interest and your dedicated can be sort of quashed a little bit. I don't know, you're meant to do netball on a Thursday, you're meant to do this, that, and the other that the school sort of provides for you, when there are so many different interests out there, and because they're not sort of followed in that path, or you're not sort of expected to do that, it can mean that people do stray away from those. And I think if you have a passion for something, try and explore that and stick to it in your own time as well if you can, even though I know schools say you have to be interested in sport or PE, or you have to be good at this. Yeah, you don't. You can obviously be interested in what you ever want to be as well.
Yeah. Well, Ben, you want to catch that comment?
Aucademy says many of us who are able to are more likely to be self-employed because we can't get employed or can't stay in team environments for work.
Yeah, that is very much the case. And I'm actually partly self-employed myself, which is good and bad. It means you have to do all this stuff. You have to do all this admin yourself, which can be really difficult, especially if you're like me and dyslexic and dyspraxic. But in other ways, being self-employed can mean that you don't have to deal, like they said, on day-to-day basis with neurotypical employers and other employees that might not understand you or end up, have problems.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Another one. Yes.
Aucademy says again, for disabled neurodivergent people, are you aware of any pressure being put on employers so that we don't have to jump through all these hoops to get employed and suitable employment?
Are you aware of any pressure being put on employers so we don't have to jump through? I think one really good element of pressure is that element of competition within sort of industry. So there's been quite a lot of sort of industry bodies set up now, such as GAIN. So they're a sort of insurance focused one. There's a lot of different financial ones now. And a lot of your sort of more forward-thinking employers are doing things with neurodiversity, which in the sort of businessy corporate world, if your competitor's doing it, then you're more likely to do it as well. So I think that's a really nice sort of bit of suitable pressure. So which is encouraging a lot of different industries to sort of move up and actually put things in place and actually change their recruitment methods and be a lot more supportive. In terms of other bits of pressure, I'd say there's some really good sort of advocacy groups out there. Obviously, there's different sort of charities and organisations like ourselves that do our best to sort of fly the neurodiversity flag and get people sort of thinking about it and educate people about it as well. But in terms of, I guess, jumping through these hoops and things like that, so there's a lot of sort of industry-based stuff that is encouraging people to change their recruitment methods. But there's also a lot of sort of autism-specific hiring programs as well now, such as like Auticon or Microsoft in the US or SAP, and a lot of big companies that are putting specific sort of programs in place as well.
Yeah, well, I think it's great that you are always encouraged, neurodivergent training, so that people who are neurodivergent are training about neurodiversity. And I think that's incredibly important, because what happens with this competition of different companies is then everyone jumps on the neurodiversity bandwagon, and people who are not neurodivergent end up teaching that, which is obviously very difficult a lot of times, because it's not really neurodiversity at all. It's kind of something else. It's kind of a brand, I suppose.
Yeah.
So that's why it's so important to hire neurodivergent trainers, so that you can get it from what it's like to experience it from people with lived experience. That's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just being able to ask questions to someone neurodivergent about their experience in the workplace, or how they found certain recruitment methods or job descriptions, and getting that first-hand bit of feedback about it. And one thing we can do as well is in the training, we can actually incorporate certain job descriptions from a company or certain processes. So they're effectively getting real-time feedback from someone neurodivergent about their experiences and how they can improve those experiences as well. Yeah, I don't know. We get a lot of good feedback about that, and that's sort of, I guess, our like USP as such, our sort of specialist thing that we do. But yeah, I think it's really valuable to learn from neurodivergent people themselves that have been through that sort of recruitment process and in the workplace as well, and got adjustments and things.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I remember one job application I had where I got an interview, but they wanted me to basically design a course for the interview, and I thought, wow, design an entire course for an interview. And I ended up not going to. It was just too much work to like have to think about that and actually do that. And then if I didn't get the job, what was I going to do with all? Yeah, but sometimes it was a teaching position at a college, I think. But before it'd been like teach something to someone or do something, but it was actually to design an entire kind of course, which I felt was way too much.
That seems a bit much.
I know, it was way too much. I didn't go to the interview. Okay. Oh, we got Victoria here, Ben.
Victoria asks, is there support for managing self-employment if you struggle with executive function, etc.?
Yeah, so we are going to be looking at access. Well, we are going to be talking about I'm in my training mode. We are going to be talking about access to work, hopefully in like a few minutes. But if you are self-employed, you can get access to work funding anyway. And I don't know if we should naturally sort of move on to that question about access to work, just because that relates quite nicely. But the Access to Work scheme is a government-funded scheme which helps people find and sort of retain employment if you are disabled or neurodivergent or autistic, for example. It can also support people that are do experience sort of mental health challenges, so you don't have to have that formal diagnosis of autism or whatever that may be. You can still access the support if you do identify as being neurodivergent. And how to apply for it. So, sorry, we'll come on to that question. Yeah. How to apply for it. So it's on a website. So it's the Access to Work. If you just Google Access to Work, hopefully it'll be the first thing that comes up. And all it is, you need to fill in your details and things like that. And then what you'll do after that is you'll get a workplace assessment. So I think they're all sort of virtual now, but that may be an hour chat with someone from Access to Work who specialises in sort of workplace support. And of course, if you are non-verbal or do want different accessibility requirements, they can of course accommodate that as well. So don't worry about this awful sort of chat if you don't necessarily have to have it if you don't feel comfortable as well. And if you are self-employed or employed or even going for a job interview, you can use Access to Work. So you don't have to be in a job. You don't have to be with a formal employer. You don't have to have a manager. You can be self-employed and have, I don't know, a training business or a Depop business or an art business or whatever that may be. You just need to provide proof for employment. So that's obviously whatever that is according to your sort of work. So if you have, if you registered as an organisation or self-employed or whatever that may be, you just provide that, and then they will give you a list of support mechanisms that would help you. So whether that's coaching to do with your executive function, or whether that's a mentor, whether that's physical support or travel support or whatever that may be, they will then provide you with grant funding to fund that. So you don't have to worry about providing the cost of that. Hopefully that makes sense. That's the biggest rambly instructions anyway. But the government website is great.
So even if you're self-employed but you're struggling, you can apply for funding through that Access to Work. Yeah. So even if you're working.
So any sort of work, freelance, self-employed, run a business, in employment, part-time employment, looking for a job, got an interview, whatever that may be, you can get support.
That's great. Cool.
Yeah, super, super helpful. Not many people, I don't think many people actually know about Access to Work, but a lot of employers don't. But I think if you are unsure and you do think you could do with a bit of extra support in the workplace, have a little look. You can also speak to some advisors. So if you're unsure about how that applies to you or what you could get, hopefully they can be really, really helpful as well.
Cool. Very good. Ben, do you want to do the next question? I think, what is it? Question?
Yeah.
I don't know. What number are we on, Ben?
But I do 6 because it leads quite nicely from the last one.
Okay, good.
About more specifically about what support is available to disabled and neurodivergent people when they find work, and I guess also how do they access it, like in the actual job rather than access to work.
Sorry, say again, Ben. How do they?
So how do they access it in the workplace rather than necessarily from like Access to Work program?
Oh, so you'd be happy to know it's the same portal and the same application that you would, So Access to Work cover interviews, finding employment, actually going to that interview and attending that interview, and workplace accommodations as well. So it all relates nicely to our lovely friend reasonable adjustments, which would be the same when you're in a job. And in terms of support that can be available, so obviously physical support, whether that's Grammarly for dyslexic people or different softwares, or I know Dragons for dyslexic people as well, which is text-to-speech software. Other support, including things like sort of utilise people's strengths and understanding them sort of workplace accommodation. So letting potentially an autistic person come in later and avoid that busy commute, or having a quieter lunch break, or quieter an office space, or being allowed to work from home. They're the ones we would typically see. But yeah, there's no set list again. So it completely depends on the employer and yourself on what works best for you as well in the workplace.
Yeah, and I think that's really important to stay. And you said that we kind of talked about this before we went on, and I think you said it's so individual because everyone is so different in what they are needing, and we just said, oh, how about some of the the favorites or the things that come up the most? But actually, there's it depends on each employee and employer as well. But yeah, I think that's important to say. What we got here?
Callum asks, how would someone who is undiagnosed autistic go about finding the right support for them? HR? Question mark.
Yeah, so if you don't have an official diagnosis, you can still go for access to work, but it's just a different stream of funding. So it's called mental health support. And even though it says it's mental health support, it doesn't mean that you may have sort of mental health challenges like your typical ones. It could be the fact you are undiagnosed autistic, for example, so you are still qualified and still are able to get that support, and it would still go through the same sort of procedure. So if you wanted access to work recommendations and someone's specialist to then sort of determine your support needs, and you don't want to rely on HR or your manager, you would still then go through the same process. They would work with you to understand your challenges in the workplace or whatever that may be, and they would then still give you that sort of list of accommodations and support that would be best for you. So all these people that do the sort of assessments are specialists. They do hundreds of these, so they have probably seen sort of similar things before. So you are in sort of very safe and capable hands when you are actually doing that application. They are sort of making them recommendations as well. But of course, you could go to HR if you want to. Hopefully there is someone nice and understanding at work that could work with you to sort of understand your strengths and potential challenges. So yeah, either or really, depends on how comfortable you are and what you want to go for, really.
Cool. Yeah, Ben, do you have any other questions popped up while we've been sitting here? Oh, that's just making something else. Another one. I've just gotten really distracted because we've got a private chat, and I was reading the questions off the private chat, and now I've scrolled down, and there's a bunch of other things that Chloe has been saying that I have totally ignored. So sorry, Chloe.
Oh,
yeah. Whoopsies. Yes, body doubling. And I almost said when I was talking about being just on Zoom with another person working. Yeah, and I almost said body doubling, and I thought that cannot be the word that is for that. My brain just kind of went a bit. Body doubling doesn't make any sense. But yeah, it is body doubling. It sounds like something somebody would do if they were working on a film as a stunt person. Body doubling. Not working with somebody because they just need a little bit of support. Yes. Anyways, totally off topic. Oh, somebody says, awesome live chat, great information. Thank you. Fabulous.
Oh, thanks, Janelle.
Yeah. Okay, so shall we move on to the final question? There's two final questions, but Victoria said something.
Victoria says, I think it's neurotypical communication skills, which may not be our strengths. I think the double empathy problem impacts communication in the workplace. Autistic communication often is misinterpreted.
Yes, that is very much the case. And I don't know, I can explain the double empathy problem for people that might not know about it. But basically, that's Damien Milton who came up with that theory. And basically it's saying, for a long time, there's been a lot of myths about autistic people in particular, in relation to having empathy and not being able to perspective take from their perspective about neurotypical people. But what Damien Milton has been saying is actually it's a two-way street. It's a double empathy on both sides. So because autistic people's experience of the world is so fundamentally different than non-autistic people, it's very difficult for non-autistic people to perspective take what it is like to be autistic. And that experience, and through that kind of double empathy problem, there's a lot of miscommunication. And there's been quite a few kind of papers written now, and experiments that works with and looking at what happens when you put a neurotypical person and an autistic person and they have to solve a problem together. The communication kind of breaks down. Where if you've got two autistic people working together or two neurodivergent people working together, they tend to communicate well and get the task done. And the same for two, neurotypical people. But the problem comes with, it's almost like we're speaking two different languages a lot of times, and that perspective taking from both sides. Which isn't totally well known. I think that is a very good point, Victoria.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that.
Yeah, that's great.
And I think also that the fact that autistic people, a lot of time, our experience of language is very different as well, and that autistic people need things to be very specific, and a lot of times we can be more literal in our understanding of language. Mm-hmm. So when people are talking to us, it's really important to kind of be very specific. And Chloe always does the thing of, does anybody have a pen? And usually the neurotypical people in the room are like, I've got a pen. This is all I have right now. It's a STEM toy. But actually it's like, well, I didn't ask for a pen. I just asked if anybody had a pen. And I think ultimately that is the difference. A lot of times people will ask questions of autistic people and expect a response, but actually the question didn't ask the thing that they wanted. They said it in a very subtle way, or and that can be quite difficult. So Dr. Chloe said something. Rachel's hypotheses explains why. Yeah, so Rachel Cullen has been working with this, who's actually Damon Milton's PhD student, to help explain why the communication is different. So there's practical explanations, building to support double empathy too. Yeah, so basically that's kind of this next step is kind of saying why the double empathy problem is happening. And one of those is to do with the difference in languages. So autistic people tend to just listen to, when we think about a sentence, we look at it at a word level. Which means there's a lot more processing because we look at each word, where non-autistic people tend to look at a sentence at a sentence level. So they just see it all as a whole. And that is very, very different. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so final question. What is your favorite STEM?
Honestly, I hear about this thing so much from so many different autistic people, but I couldn't necessarily pinpoint one of my favourites. So we definitely talk about this loads with our candidates. But yeah, honestly, I really can't pinpoint one particular thing.
That's fine. Do you not have an object that you play with? Anything like a ring or a necklace, or?
I tend to be quite about things like hair bubbles. Not necessarily objects. On my list.
Yes, I have one too. That is very STEM. See, this is why I like to point this out, because all human beings STEM, and you don't have to be autistic to STEM. Just the autistic people STEM more because our experience of the world and our sensory experience means we need to regulate more. But as an ADHDer, you will need to regulate more as well. You be understimulated, so you need to do two things at the same time, or hair bubble. Very good. Yes. Where do you have a hair bubble on your hand now?
I don't. I've got one here.
No. You've got one there, though. You've got one.
I've got the same one as you, though, the curly one.
Oh, you do? Yeah, because I like to do this with it. I don't know why.
Yes.
I can do it over and over again.
Yeah.
It's just very simple. Yeah, great. Fabulous. Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know. Okay, Ben, what is your final question?
Oh yes. What's your favourite form of potato?
Okay. Oh, I do like a fat chip, to be honest, like a chunky chip with some mayonnaise. I think that's my go-to. You know, the ones you get at pubs and things like that, and you get a burger or fish and chips, and I'm not a big fan of McDonald's fries or anything like that. But yeah, big chunky chip, I'd say.
Oh gosh, I feel as though I have to give mine because this is a new thing.
Yeah, go for it.
New potato. Oh, favorite form of potato. Yes, I think I do like a chunky chip as well. I don't like the thin fry thing. I think that's
No,
very
I don't.
American.
Yeah.
And I grew up on that, but I actually like when there's actual potato in your chip.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm literally the same.
What about you, Ben?
I'm not sure. I'm quite impartial. 'Cause,
Yeah, you're usually a potato. Yeah. Yeah, it's quite hard, isn't it? When you identify as a potato sometimes.
Yeah.
To then say what's your favorite form of potato. But I think probably with the eyeballs. So next week we have live Wayne Atwood. I'm talking about before and after diagnosis. So that should be really great. And thank you so much, Emily, today. And this has been fabulous, just to learn about your company, and really glad that you're around and doing this and helping neurodivergent people. And just great to have neurodivergent people running businesses as well, which actually affect and help other neurodivergent people.
Absolutely. Yeah. And finally, if anyone does want to know anything or more about us or anything like that, our email address is hello@enna.org. We'll happily take anything, I know, potentially a bit more confidential. And of course, you're welcome to have a little meander on the website as well at what we do and things like that as well. Oh, where is it?
Oh, yeah, I just think everything just kind of spin for me, and I started saying, oh no, several times, and I thought, oh, this is probably not good, Annette. But maybe say that last sentence again, just in case people missed it.
Yeah, so if anyone wants to have a look on our website or register or see what we do, I know the website's come up quite a lot at the bottom. But yeah, feel free to have a nosy around at what we do and have a look at some of our blogs or Facebook page or LinkedIn posts or whatever that may be, to have a little look at what we do in more detail.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much. And thank you, Ben, for being my co-host.
Thanks, Ben.
And we'll see everybody next week.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.